Or Yad, you can let me know if you think we should change the order.
I believe we should, yes. It seems that both of them are in the same meeting, so they might be a minute or two late. So please proceed as you see fit.
Okay. Well, I could begin with my remarks, which I was intending to give after those two opening speakers. I am the moderator for the session, and I am also giving some opening remarks before we hear the keynote session from our esteemed faith leaders. So perhaps what I will do is go ahead, and then I'll just stop and pause, and we'll hear from them when they come on. So I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to speak briefly before we begin this keynote session. This is a topic and a moment that interests me personally. I was born close to the time of the 1972 Stockholm Conference into a family descended from Europeans, including Swedes on my mother's side. I was told that my ancestors came to escape the heavy hand of religious authorities who would deny them religious freedom. My country, the United States, has always spoken of this ideal of religious freedom. It was only in recent decades that I came to realize that that principle was not extended to everyone, and especially not to the native peoples of this land, whose traditions were marked by reverence for the natural world. I also grew up in a family that had a particular regard for the United Nations because one person who was central to its founding in 1945, Secretary of State Cordell Hull, was from the same rural place in Tennessee that my father's family is from. So most everything in and around the small town of Carthage, Tennessee is named for Cordell Hull. He actually won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1945, designated as Father of the United Nations. Hull, like my own grandparents, grew up without electricity and lived through the period of unprecedented change and economic growth that marked the post-World War II period in this part of the world. I recall my own grandparents remembering the advent of things that I took for granted. Refrigerators, toasters, washer dryers, air conditioning, television, highways. And I mention this because it seems notable how recent this way of life is, even in the most developed industrial nations. In Cordell Hull's memoir, he writes of his childhood, quote, "With what we grew and what we hunted and trapped, we had no great need for money." Of course, the development that I am pointing to here is seen as progress for some very good reasons related to quality of life. But it also seems that it has become disconnected from that issue of quality of life. It seems that social norms and values took a turn for the worse somewhere along the way related to this development model. Ever-increasing production and consumption cycles fueling trade was mistaken for peace building. High numbers of gross domestic product or GDP masqueraded as common good. Inequity was held as necessary for competition. Money confused with virtue. Hoarding material possessions associated with success. And of course, development has come at the expense of nature. The way of thinking that discounts religion and spirituality has often been blind to how deep this shift in values has been. The American transcendentalist writer Ralph Waldo Emerson expressed it this way: "A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming." If we worship the idea that humankind is special because we dominate nature, we become separate from the natural world. Also, if a way of life that is intimately tied with nature is seen and described as poverty to be eradicated, we are on our way to eradicating nature too. Once we have shifted values away from reverence for those biocultural ties, we lose our sense of belonging in the natural world. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the matriarchal indigenous society that is more commonly known as the Iroquois from around this region where I now live, pointed this out in position papers they delivered to the NGOs of the United Nations in September 1977, including a document called A Basic Call to Consciousness. It argued against the imposition of a way of life on the rest of the world that had been imposed on them here in the United States. They said the majority of the world does not find its roots in Western culture or traditions. The majority of the world finds its roots in the natural world, and it is the natural world and the traditions of the natural world that must prevail if we are to develop truly free and egalitarian societies. So in my lifetime, the population of wild animals has decreased by about 60%. Over half of rainforests have been chopped down. Of course, we know the human population has doubled, but the wealth gap has widened. In my home place, local cultures have been largely replaced by giant box stores and fast food places, including in that town of Carthage, Tennessee. And we have loaded the atmosphere so full of climate changing pollution that the weather has already begun to change, which is something the Haudenosaunee warned about in those papers I described earlier also. We are now in a climate emergency on the brink of unspeakable loss. That loss is not just economic, it is cultural, it is spiritual. We know the cause. It is the value system that has taken hold, that propels the two modern megatrends of pollution, particularly carbon pollution from the burning of fossil fuels, and depletion, particularly depletion of those carbon sinks, like forests and soils and wetlands. If we are to confront this compound ecological crisis, we must look clearly at the level of cause, not just the level of effects. We must return to the spirit of inquiry that existed in Stockholm in 1972. When Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme spoke at that conference, he referenced that post-world period in this part of the world and in Europe, that unprecedented technical and economic progress. He referenced the way of thinking. He explained that any moral uneasiness about poverty in the rest of the world was tempered by the prospect that with rigorous development efforts, they would catch up. The wake-up call at Stockholm 1972 centered around the realization that the Earth's resources were finite. And a central issue, as we know at this conference, was the need to address a potential conflict between economic development and environmental protection. As Palme stated, quote, "The decisive question is in which direction we will develop, by what means we will grow, which qualities we want to achieve, and what values we wish to guide our future." The Stockholm Conference was important for many reasons. It marked a more inclusive world in some ways. For example, the People's Republic of China had just become a part of the United Nations and sent a delegation. But East and West Germany were not yet members, and the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries did not attend, in part because of the exclusion of East Germany. But Stockholm 1972 also marked a wiser world, thinking about long-term problems beyond the daily distractions of the ordinary course of multilateral business. Specifically, it revealed a United Nations that was taking responsibility for the global environmental questions that no one else could or would address. The basis of life, the United Nations, is the only mechanism we have to come together and protect. The UN has never abdicated this responsibility, and as we saw just this past week with the release of the latest IPCC International Panel on Climate Change report, and also with the announcement of the Global Plastics Treaty. I commend those who have worked so hard in recent decades to bring nature to the center of the work of the United Nations, including through the Sustainable Development Goals. But let us be honest, we have lost our way. It is not only that we are off target for the 17 goals and we have to push harder. Something is missing and something is wrong. What is missing? The most vital aspects of the human experience, the meaning and belonging that come from culture, including elements of culture that bond people to the ecosystems that they live within. What is wrong? The forces behind these two modern megatrends of pollution and depletion have found their footing within these goals and within the extensive scaffolding and rhetoric of sustainable development. Profit-seeking industries have a lot of power in this world. Let us not be naive about this or dismiss it as too indelicate a thing to say. They rely on a notion of progress that has gone unchallenged, a notion that includes the kind of top-down consumerism, individualistic consumerism that sustains their markets and still routinely sacrifices nature. We cannot slip into a critique that blames people for lacking moral fiber to stand up to this. The vast majority are living in systems in which the commons are being devoured, and they don't have real choices. To correct course, we need to ask some different questions. Not only is no one left behind, but also, are we sure we're going in the right direction? Who and what is development actually for? So the world's faith and wisdom traditions have been asking these deeper questions for some time. Reading texts like Laudato Si and Al-Mizan is like water for a thirsty person. It is within this scholarship from faith communities that the most vital work is being done on the relationship between development and environment. It's because these scholars see the deeper issues. They're not naive about those dimensions of belief and worship that Emerson described. And they're not naive about the nature of power. They carry intimate knowledge also of the relationship between colonization and environmental devastation, even, or perhaps especially, from within those religious traditions that were bound up in it. And finally, they are connected to ancient traditions that have stood the test of time and offer powerful teachings and practices on living life to the fullest, which of course means living in harmony with nature and with each other. And so I am truly honored and very excited to have this session and to hear from our faith leaders who have graciously offered to share with us today. We are meant to begin that session now, but I want to check and see if we have the ambassador ready.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I'm here and I sincerely apologize for the delay. Thank you for your patience and understanding of not being able to show up in time, which is normally a principle that I try to follow. So let me just take a few minutes to use this opportunity to share with you some of our vision for Stockholm +50, but I think also maybe lay out some of the opportunities where we see with the faith community and where we also quite humbly would actually need your assistance and your help and your message on the way. As you know, the Stockholm +50 has a theme of a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity. It's a quite long title, but it's a title that I personally hold quite dear because I think it's so many key messages in that title. It's about the health of the planet. It's about the prosperity. It's about showing that we are responsible to act upon commitments we have made, but it's also about showing that we are ready to stand up and to see the opportunities on the transition and the path forward to reach our commitments. And the opportunities may look different depending on where you are in the world. It may look different depending on what organization, what government you represent, but also it may be different on who you are as a person. And I think if we are to succeed in delivering on the commitments made in the 2030 agenda, in the Paris Agreement, and on all of the progress that has been shown here at UNEA and at Unap 50, we also need to go deep inside and see what is my contribution? How can I sometimes take a step backwards and reflect upon the common path that we are going? I'm not quoting this word by word, but in the speech that the Prime Minister at the time in Sweden, Mr. Olof Palme, gave, he spoke about our future is common, we must shape it together, and we must share it together. I think it's a very beautiful message in the sense that we are on this common journey, although we have different starting points, different responsibilities, different opportunities. I was listening to this statement I was giving from the faith communities earlier this week. And I think there's also a lot of key messages on collecting different voices, but being on the same journey. You will know that we are creating Stockholm +50 around a set of leadership dialogues. The first one on reflecting on the urgency of action for a healthy planet for the prosperity of all. And this is where a very wise person that I spoke to early when I took on this job. He said to me that 50 years of environmental governance, 50 years of environmental diplomacy, is an opportunity to also be seriously self-reflecting. How well have we done up to now? What are the things that we need to change? And how do we sometimes change the nature of our conversation? How can we sometimes get a better conversation starter when we go into discussions, negotiations that we know we will have differences of views in? So from our point of view, with the nature of character of Stockholm +50, with not being a negotiating fora, but being a fora where we are together working towards strengthening implementation, it's an opportunity to enhance the dialogue on making a difference here and now, but also identifying those key issues that we know that are out there, that sometimes are difficult to have a conversation around, but we know that we will need to be able to solve them if we are moving ahead to reach our goals and the way I think science is very clearly speaking to us. And today, and I have to apologize also, I may not be able to stay all the time, but I think from what I heard here and some of the discussions I also had with the youth representatives on faith, who is participating also in the youth task force, I think I've already now learned that there is a very important messages coming from this group also. So with that, thank you so much for inviting me. And I also hoping that this is a start of a series of conversation. And sometimes having meeting in the margins, you know, of big international meetings is great because everyone is there. But sometimes it's also a challenge because everyone is very busy. So it's more difficult sometimes to focus your mind. So let's also see this as a, I'm not going to say start of the conversation because the conversation has been ongoing, but one step in the conversation leading up to Stockholm +50. Thank you very much.
We can hear you, Karina.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now? Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those words. And now we have Haruku Okosu, who is Principal Coordination Officer for Stockholm +50 at Unap.
Thank you very much, and also apologies from my side for the delay in coming into this meeting. And thank you very much also for the invitation to this very important and interesting, unique meeting that you're having right now. You already know the context of Stockholm +50, so I'm not going into that. And I'm sure Iyad has already explained how this is a very unique UN meeting in that we would very much like to have stakeholders engaged from the very beginning, way before the meeting starts, and for you to really tell the UN, us, what it is that you would like to see from the meeting, and what it is that you would like to offer, and look for counter offers and counter proposals from other stakeholders, including the governments. And I think this is something that we are trying to encourage. And I think with IAD's great cooperation, you have already been developing this foundation very strongly. But following his sort of example, we are also trying to engage other types of stakeholders, including women's groups, youth, indigenous peoples and local communities, people at the regional, subnational levels, cities, and so on and so forth, to see if they can actually create a ground-up approach to be able to define what it is for them to have a healthy planet, what it is that they can actually contribute as agents of power to change the trend that we see today, and to contribute to something that we can leave for the next generation, something good. And I think this community has a very unique outreach of stakeholders that is very different from the governments, and that are very different also from the United Nations. You have a very different set of convening power and convincing power to the people on how they should be living in harmony with nature, and how they should contribute as a part of the future generation to continue enjoying the ecosystem services and other services that we have benefited in the last 50 years. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing what kind of discussions are available, and also to see how, in your views, what kind of areas we can see the involvement and improvement, and how we can change the tide together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we will proceed to our keynote session, and we will begin with our first speaker. Honored in 2020 by Grist magazine as one of the world's leading eco-theologians, Fazlun Khalid is a pioneer in Islamic environmentalism. He is the founder of the Islamic Foundation for Ecology and Environmental Sciences, now recognized as the world's leading Islamic environmental NGO. His book, Signs on the Earth, Islam, Modernity, and the Climate Crisis, which was published in 2019, has been described as a masterclass in framing contemporary issues from a faith perspective. Fazlun Khalid, please continue, share. We need to unmute, I think. Okay.
Sidi Fazlun, the unmute button is at the top of your screen. It's the mic icon. Oh. You have to click it again and give it a second. Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Stockholm +50. It would appear that one of the core aims of Stockholm +50 is to redefine humanity's relationship with nature, to foster prosperity within the planetary bounds. And I end of quote. I have difficulty in digesting this proposition, as the Global Footprint Network informs us that by July 2021, we consumed planetary resources that should have lasted us for the whole of 2021. We will be playing out the same scenario this year and in years to come, living in borrowed time and helping ourselves to the depleting stocks of Earth's resources, the lion's share of which will be sucked up by the richest countries in the world. The idea of fostering prosperity in this scenario poses, in my view, more questions than it answers. I would prioritize reimagination, one of the 5 elements proposed to take center stage at Stockholm +50. Sustainable development needs to be rethought, because in order for the less well-off to meet their needs without consequent negative impact on Earth systems, Those who are already have more than enough should accept considerably less. There is some balancing to be done here, which is to remind the well-off of their obligations. Will Stockholm +50 give this the priority it deserves? And again, clause 9 of the draft ministerial declaration of UNEA5, soon to be made public, refers to, and I quote, holistic approaches that truly value nature. Holistic approaches that truly value nature. But the new reality is that we now live in a global village, viewing existence as a linear continuum of economic progress that goes right against the grain of the natural world. This process objectified nature to the extent that the sources of life were turned into resources for plunder. This is how we come to face the triple threats that are upon us today: climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution, added to which we now have the COVID pandemic. We now live in the Anthropocene, the age of the human, reflecting the fact that we are now a force of nature. The financial system we have conjured for ourselves provides a convenient illusion that there is more wealth to be had than actually exists in the natural world. A proposition reducing the money we use today to the nature of a virus. This is called capitalism, projecting the idea of abundance for all based on endless economic growth, seen by many as a serious diversion from reality. An IMF blog last December 21 reported that global debt has reached a record 226 trillion. Debt increases are particularly striking in advanced economies, where public debt rose around 70% of GDP in 2007 to 124% of GDP in 2020. All spiritual traditions teach us mindfulness, caring, and sharing. However, in today's world, greed has been institutionalized and is now known as consumerism. Our rituals are incomplete without going shopping. We are now seamlessly becoming green consumers, hooked into social media and trapped by the mobile phone, heralding the consolidation of techno-civilization, much to the delight of big business. This is where we hit the buffers of biodiversity. Where will we continue to find the rare earth, the cobalt, and the lithium that are going to give us high-efficiency batteries that will drive our civilization? And where are we going to dump these batteries by the ton when they are exhausted? It is now time to elevate our level of consciousness to another level of reality. There is space between optimism and pessimism, which we need to populate. This is called realism. And in a sense, it reflects the thoughts of Prophet Muhammad when he told his followers to plant the seeds in their hand, even if they thought the world was coming to an end the next day. What and where are the seeds of hope we must plant today? How can we create a green civilization and avoid falling into the trap of green consumerism? How can faith communities trigger changes in a system which is dominant and all pervasive and not of their own making? Has our time come? But we need to remind ourselves that we are well and truly embedded in the global village, which is not our creation. The triple threat reflects symptoms, not causes. And I have two propositions which Stockholm 50 might wish to take into consideration that goes to the root of the issue we face. A, bring to the table the subject of degrowth, which we all seem to be studiously avoiding. And B, give serious consideration to a reappraisal of the entire education system. In the view of the eminent educationist David Orr, who I paraphrase, the system creates highly educated people who trash the planet. Serious illness can only be cured by strong medicine. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now, Father Jostrom Isaac Kurithadam is coordinator of the Center of Ecology and Creation at the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. He is also co-chair of Philosophy of Science and director of the Institute of Social and Political Sciences at the Salesian Pontifical University in Rome. His recent books include The 10 Green Commandments of Laudato Si and The Philosophical Roots of the Ecological Crisis. Father, please share.
Thank you very much, Karina. As I speak to you from the Vatican, very humbly, modestly, please allow me to bring you blessings and prayers from Pope Francis. And thanks for the invitation. And on behalf of my colleagues on the panel, would like to thank the United Nations for your efforts to, and especially you and all of you, efforts to bring together faith leaders. How can faith communities contribute towards Stockholm +50? I would say at least in 3 ways. +50, I think by bringing hope. Ours is a world that requires hope. And I am reminded of the biblical tradition of the Jubilee. You know, it's a very ancient tradition, nearly 3,000 years old, that every 50 years we have this Jubilee. And Jubilee is a very holistic concept. I think one thing we need to avoid is to reduce everything to the environment. You know, Jubilee for the Jews was allowing the land to rest. You know, allowing the land to lie fallow. And think of the intensive modern agriculture, how much, as Khalid was telling me before me, how we are crossing the footprints, you know, trying to plant most out of the plant, squeeze most out of the planet. So Jubilee is allowing the land to rest. Jubilee is also, again, restoring harmony. You know, there was this tradition, if you are dead, everything was just written off, you know. If people had become slaves, had got into bonded labor, they became free. And we really wish that this +50, we really be a Jubilee, when we can really, there could be a new beginning, when people can be liberated, when debts can be written off, this very unjust economic system that we are living with. And Jubilee means also peace with God, the Creator. So my hope, you know, is that Stockholm +50 really ushers in a new beginning, that we bring hope. The second contribution that faith communities can bring, I would say, is to go to the deeper roots of the problem, of the ecological, social crisis we are facing, the spiritual roots and the moral roots. The spiritual roots, I think of Laudato Si, right at the beginning, Pope Francis, in paragraph 2, he says, the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also evident in the sickness of the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. I think we need to address this. Again, Laudato Si, paragraph 10, Pope Francis, recalling the example of Saint Francis of Assisi, says, peace is among ourselves, peace is with Mother Earth, peace is with God, but also peace with ourselves. You know, that we are returning to conflicts and wars and lack of peace, because Pope Benedict used to say, you know, the external deserts are expanding because the internal deserts have become so vast. Recycling is important, sustainability is important. But I think unless we get to the deeper roots, you know, like if I'm not feeling well, maybe I'm suffering from cancer, it's not sufficient to address the symptoms. We need to address the deeper spiritual roots and also the moral roots. I think that's why even we faith communities, we need to say, mea culpa, we have probably not given our best. That we need to recover our prophetic dimension. You know, it's also very old, I think, of Prophet Amos in the Old Testament, who denounced a system that sells the poor for a pair of sandals. And our capitalistic economic system is plundering the planet and also ravaging the bodies of the poor. It is, as Pope Francis says, the cry of the earth, but also is intimately linked to the cry of the poor. And someone has to challenge the system. And I think that's where faith communities, we need to become once again prophetic, pointing to the spiritual, but also the moral roots of the crisis. And unless we solve the real, address the real roots, we won't solve the problem. As Khaled was saying, if we really, things really get worse. That's where I think faith communities, we need to muster courage and say we cannot live with this system, the great ecological debt, how the global south is suffering, and someone has to become the voice of the voiceless. I think that's what we are called to do. The third contribution with that I close is I think what faith communities can really gather communities. We can build up a bottom-up people's movement. And what gives me hope is that Harvard study that says if we can reach the critical mass, and the critical mass is not a big number, if you can reach 3.5% of a group, we have the critical mass. And the example they quote of how the Berlin Wall came down because the youth came together and they reached the critical mass, what Nelson Mandela did, what Mahatma Gandhi did. So I think faith communities, if we can really come together, we can create the critical mass. And a bottom-up, people's involvement. I just want to mention, inspired by Laudato Si, Pope Francis launched the Laudato Si action platform. We are saying we cannot afford to wait. We just have it. This is a critical decade. So we are inviting, in 7 years, we created 7 sectors, but all are there, beginning with families, our parishes, our dioceses in our context, but our faith communities, our schools and universities. And I think of hundreds of universities already joining this. Our hospitals and healthcare centers, our businesses and economy is so crucial. Unless we change the economic system, the paradigm, things won't change, degrowth, and we need to propose a different system. Then we have groups, movements, organizations, and finally, or religious orders, So we are, and it's open to all people of goodwill, the Laudato Si action plan, just a very humble, modest example, but we really need to, walk the talk, beginning with our own faith. And who knows, with that we will succeed in creating the critical mass, So these are the 3 points I would like to make, let's Stockholm 50 plus be a new beginning. That we can bring hope, that we really address the deeper spiritual, moral injustice, which is at the root of the ecological, which is also social crisis, and that we create the critical mass, that we begin to act, that we get our communities together, that we become the change, as Mahatma Gandhi used to say, that we want to see in the world. And count on us in whatever way we can do because this is the critical decade we have. We have no planet B. So count on us, and we look forward to collaborating with you. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And now the Most Reverend Mark MacDonald. Reverend MacDonald became the Anglican Church of Canada's first national Indigenous Anglican bishop in 2007, after serving as bishop of the U.S. Episcopal Diocese of Alaska for 10 years. In 2019, he was elevated to archbishop. He has had a long and varied ministry, holding positions in many places within the United States and Canada, as well as in traditional territories of First Nations peoples. We're so honored you're with us, Reverend MacDonald, please.
Miigwech, thank you. I greet you in one of the first languages of this land that we call Turtle Island, and as Canada and the United States. And I have wished you all peace, and also at the same time, I have acknowledged you as being relatives, and that the way in which that is shaped, it invites us all to join in that relationship of being relatives, but it's understood as something that we must commit ourselves to, and at the same time understand that we are relatives with all of creation. And that speaks to the heart of what I would like to say to you today. I think the very first thing that we need to do as people of faith is to understand that in the past number of decades, going further, certainly, but intensified by our present situation, we have been shaped in our understanding, our imagination, and in our hearts by economic forces, by technological forces, and also by a scientific materialism that all works together to have a very consequential and very dangerous impact on us, separating us from each other, separating us from creation, separating us from the life itself. We must understand that we are being shaped by our technology in ways in which our religious practice used to shape us. We are being shaped by our economic forces in the ways that religious practice did. I believe that and here would be my second point, that it is urgent for us to reconnect humanity to the rest of creation, that it is urgent for us to understand the living relationship that we have with all of life, a life that has been given to us, in my understanding, by God. And I think the most important thing is that we begin to say that we are not human without the rest of creation. We don't exist apart from that. We don't have humanity apart from that. And the third thing I want to say is related to indigenous peoples. Indigenous people today stand in a prophetic relationship to the rest of humanity. And that prophetic relationship is calling us back to precisely what I mentioned before. Indigenous peoples are stewards. Their governance oversees an estimated up to a quarter of the world's remaining usable land. Oftentimes, where they are the stewards of that land, they are not even recognized as existing within those ecosystems. It is very clear that the world economic and political systems have a difficult time understanding, appreciating, and seeing the life of people who live in harmony with the land, maintaining that connection. An estimated 80% of the world's remaining biological diversity is within the hands of indigenous people. And so I would say this and emphasize it as being critical to everything that I say. There is no livable future for our planet in which indigenous people's rights are not respected. They are not a niche issue on the side. Yeah, we should do that along with taking care of the planet. Right now, it is one of the most urgent planetary needs that we have. And then finally, I would say that we need love. We need love. We need to love one another. We need to love. We need to love creation, and we need to find in love the way forward. The love of our hearts has grown cold in this world that has separated us from the rest of creation. In this world that allows us to turn away from the poor, in this world that allows us to not even see the stewardship of indigenous peoples over vast quantities of land. So I would end that we find the love to heal the sacred circle of life which we are a part of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now we will hear from Bishop Andreas Holmberg. He is the Bishop of Stockholm, having been elevated on March 5th, 2019. In the same year, he defended his thesis on being church in a transforming world, the theology that emerges in the Swedish church congregations working in multicultural and multi-religious environments. He was ordained priest in 1993 for the Diocese of Stockholm and served there as parish priest and as diocesan deputy. Thank you so much for being with us, Bishop.
Thank you very much. I'm happy and honored to be part of this dialogue. I find it very encouraging that it's happening, and it's been very inspiring to listen to all of you who have spoken before me. Thank you very much to all of you. So what do I want from Stockholm Plus 50? From my faith community perspective, that was the first question posed to us in the panel. And I have a more general wish and a specific wish, or dream maybe. And a more general wish is that people of faith and faith community, faith-based organizations would be much more recognized and acknowledged as being absolutely key in our efforts to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think this dialogue is in itself a witness to a growing acknowledgement of that. And I'm encouraged by what Ambassador Johanna said, and also Haruko, what you said in your introductions. The concept note of Stockholm Plus 50 talks about achieving a healthy planet through 5 interconnected pathways: regeneration, recovery, rebalance, renewal, and reimagination. And as faith communities, we know a lot about those things, all of them, because we have been around for centuries, even thousands of years. So we know a great deal. We have a lot of experience about enduring constant change, managing great challenges, and overcoming crisis. It's in our DNA as faith communities, as people of faith, to have resilience, to have a capacity to endure, to adapt, to survive, and to thrive again. So I think not only the United Nations, but also governments around the world need, and that's my wish, to acknowledge more the key contribution that people of faith have towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, a more specific, or even a very specific wish, is that I dream that Stockholm Plus 50 would be remembered afterwards as a conference when faith-based organizations came together and demanded or pushed for ecocide to be internationally recognized as a crime, adding ecocide as a 5th crime in the wrong statute of the International Criminal Court. What a dream it would be if we, people of faith, together could demand that from the lawmakers around the world. The bishops of the Church of Sweden, we have all demanded that together, and so has the Christian Council of Sweden, which collects 26 member churches. So that's a specific wish from the conference. Now, the second question was, how do you want the new development paradigm to be? First, I think the new development paradigm needs to have a very long-term perspective, and I think many of you have already touched upon this, because the dominant current development paradigm is very short-sighted and very sort of egotistical in our time, our generation. It's all about me, and now, when it ought to be about us, all of us, we and our grandchildren and their grandchildren, and so on. And faith traditions, we have a very long-term view on life on earth. We don't anxiously look to the next election. We are not at all inspired by the very short-term perspective or quarterly capitalism. Rather, we think in terms of generations and centuries. And the holy narratives in our faith traditions, and Fasul, you cite one of them, inspire us not to only think about the here and now of our time and our generation, but also about the good and the fortunes of generations to come. So that's just one example of how I think we can contribute to the broader work. Secondly, the new development paradigm needs to include and pay attention to spiritual sustainability. as a fourth dimension of sustainability. So besides the three that we keep talking about, environmental, social, and economic sustainability, we also, as humans, as humanity, need to speak and think about our spiritual sustainability. And I'm certainly not the only one to speak about this, but I really believe that spiritual or existential sustainability, if you prefer, needs to be added to the whole discourse and discussion about sustainability, because spirituality gives our societies resilience, which we need badly. And just to give one example, that one aspect of that resilience is the moral guidance that faith traditions offer. And not only to individuals, because it's also about individuals demanding good ethics and morals from our corporations, from our governments. So I think the transformation to a sustainable future needs to have a moral and ethical core to motivate people to act themselves and to ask their governments and their corporations to act according to those norms. And lastly and thirdly, the new development paradigm must be built on justice. And several of you have mentioned this as well. The idea of the Jubilee year is a beautiful thought. Father Josh, I really like that. And the fruit of injustice, as we know, is suffering, it's conflict, and even war, while justice leads to peace. And this has not least to do with climate justice, which I think is a key concept to bring into the new paradigm. And there's a strong interconnectedness between peace on Earth and peace with Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop. And finally, Gopal Patel. Gopal Patel is a faith-based environmental activist, campaigner, and consultant who spearheads environmental initiatives that engage religious communities. He is co-founder and director of Bhumi Global, a nonprofit organization that educates and mobilizes Hindu communities for environmental action. He is co-chair of the United Nations Multi-Faith Advisory Council and a member of the advisory board for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Gopal.
Thank you so much to you, Karenna, to the previous speakers, and a very special thank you to Dr. Iyad Abu Mogli and his whole team at the Faith for Earth Initiative for the marathon that they have gone through over the last 2 weeks, hosting the Faith for Earth dialogues on the sidelines of UNEA 5.2. It's great to be speaking at this session today, and it's great to be speaking at the end of hearing so many other speakers, because I can kind of pick up on what they've said and kind of emphasize some of their points, which is exactly what I'm going to do. As was said, and you know, we as faith communities, we are the holders of fantastic stories and traditions and cultures that span many hundreds, thousands of years. And you know, we have had highs and lows, failures, and we have overcome adversities as spiritual communities throughout history, and we are still around, and we will be around, inshallah, for many more years to come. So what can we provide from a faith perspective? What can we say at this moment when we are planning leading up to Stockholm +50 and the world that we want to create beyond that? Because we know as faiths, our story is not complete, and the broader story of human civilization is not complete as well. And so I have I'd like to share 3 insights that I believe, not just from the Hindu community, but from the broader spiritual religious world, that we can provide insights into Stockholm +50. The first is that we are always forced to change, that the only constant in the world is change. And so therefore to embrace the changes that we have to undertake. And it's been said earlier by Dr. Fazlun Khalid that there needs to be a reimagination, a reset of how we are doing things. Business as normal cannot continue. And as Karenna alluded to, the geopolitical nature of the world 50 years ago has changed so much. By the time we hit Stockholm in a few months' time, the world is going to be very different to what it was 50 years ago. We are seeing, and we have been seeing for a number of years now, a shifting balance of power in geopolitics and the world as a whole. And we cannot, as faith communities, ignore that. But how do we engage with that? How do we proactively engage rather than trying to resist or keep the status quo, which we may have been comfortable with for a number of years. We have to recognize that change is coming over the next 50 years, and we have to see how we can engage with that. So how do we embrace the changes that we need? The second is, how can we take, I'm going to take some UN language here, how can we take a common but differentiated approach to when we talk about the environment? You know, there are traditions in the world that believe one book, one framework, one worldview is good for all people. And there are other traditions in the world that believe you need to have multiple books and multiple frameworks and multiple worldviews. So how do we reconcile these two perspectives from the religious communities of the world? We know when we do work in an interfaith community that when we try to put together an interfaith statement, oftentimes we have to water it down quite considerably so that everybody can sign on. And we know that some groups want to go a bit more further in one direction, another group wants to go more further in another direction, but we recognize that we need to get everyone together, and so we make statements and we put together ideas that everyone can buy into. But then if we extrapolate that out to the global level, which is what we're talking about right now, there'll be countries, there'll be parts of the world using their own ethical, philosophical framework that want to go further than maybe other countries are willing to go. And if we just take, for example, a conversation that a lot of us are interested in right now, which is around the rights of nature. We know that there are countries in the world based on their traditional worldviews want to talk about the rights of nature. They want to talk about the rights of a tree to live and the rights of a river and a mountain. And we know that is informed by the spirituality, the ethical worldview that that country may be coming from. But we know that there are some countries in the world that won't be able to go there because their cultural background won't allow them to see the sacredness of a river or a tree or a mountain. So how to reconcile these two worldviews? And so how can we come up with a common but differentiated approach at a global level when we are talking about issues of values and cultures and spirituality? The third thing that I think we in the faith community do really well, and I think Stockholm Plus 50 is really speaking to this, which is to give honor and thanks and to celebrate the success and the history that we have. I think so much in the environmental space, we're always looking forward and looking at the doom and the gloom and the impending crisis. But just look at where we are. We are concluding UNEA 5.2, and there have been successes just in this last 2 weeks. Father Josh spoke about the plastics treaty and so on. And then the report on animal welfare, biodiversity, and sustainable development. There have been so many successes over the last 50 years in the environmental space. And I think we as a faith community are really good at looking to the past to know what the future should be. And I think if we can use Stockholm Plus 50 as an opportunity to look to the past, look at all the great work that was done, Marie Strong and individuals like that, we can get insights into their mind, into their hearts, and understand what the path forward should look like as well. So those are my 3 points I wanted to share. Thank you. Back to you, Karenna.
Thank you so much. A perfect note to end on. And we have heard why it is so critical to engage faith voices. We can hear not only the deeper level of assessment and analysis, but also very specific suggestions brought to the table from each of these speakers about what we would like to see in Stockholm Plus 50. And now we're very fortunate that Ambassador Johanna has remained and will offer her reactions to the speakers. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. And I think it's I who am fortunate to have to, being able to be listening to all of your voices, and it has been incredibly interesting. Where shall I start? I feel, we have come to the end of the week where you have been engaged in the Faith for Earth dialogue. I was looking at the program. It's an impressive program. I have been here with, ministers, with negotiations, trying to be at too many places at the same time. So I think I will just allow myself to, of course, react on the role of Sweden as government and host of Stockholm Plus 50, but trying also to do that on a slightly personal level from what I heard not just now, but putting that in the wider context of experience of having participated in quite a few multilateral negotiations over the year. And I think many of the things that you've spoken about is addressing some of the key issues that sometimes are hindering us for being as ambitious as we want, as progressive as we want. I'm using those two words, but I'm also slightly hesitant sometimes to use the words progressive and ambition, because that depends on where you stand. And what is ambitious for someone may not be that for someone else, but at least working towards a common direction. One of the things that I often hear when we have conversations like this for Stockholm +50, and in a way I heard it also from all of you, is a wish and a hope that it would be a different meeting, a different kind of conversation. This, I would say, is also my personal hope, and one of the reasons why I actually took this assignment when I was asked. At the same time, we also know that different is sometimes the most difficult thing within following the protocols of the UN meetings. There are rules on how we do things, which are there for a very good reason. So I also hear, and I thank you very much, because all of you were very clear with your 3 points. And over the week, I have been trying to ask people, be as focused, as succinct as possible. What are your number 1 priority? What are your 3 priorities? And I listen and I hear the list. And I think I also have a question maybe back to you, because we know that we will not be able to fulfill every list and expectation for Stockholm +50. So it's also about being bold and ambitious, but avoiding a situation where we will create, let's say, a situation where you can actually not deliver on all of the expectations. And for doing that, I think, these kind of conversations and conversations between different groups, different communities, in trying to find not just the priorities of who you are representing, but our common priorities, is something that I think we need to work with quite a lot. I heard reimagination. I heard starting from a new beginning, rights of nature, common but differentiated approaches. And these are topics, issues that are almost at the heart of the discussion. I think where you can also play a very important role is to help us to get the conversation starter for each of these topics. Many of these words have been used over the time, so that if I would speak as my former proficiency in a case of a negotiator, it's a word that you hear and then immediately you have a reaction to what the other person say. And you don't actually listen on what they are trying to say and why they are saying it. But some of these words has been with us for a very long time and has been very difficult to agree, very difficult to come forward to. And with Stockholm being a different kind of meeting, not having a negotiated outcome, I think we would like very much to provide a different way of having a conversation around some of these issues. It's not an easy task. It's a very high ambition. We probably will not get all the way, but from having listening to you now, I think, the Faith for Earth dialogue, the faith community has an incredibly important role to play there. Someone also spoke about, the bottom-up process in the sense of reaching the critical mass, where I think also, many of the organizations that you represent, the Faith for Earth dialogue, has a completely different reach out. And Haruko spoke about this also when she's next to me. That's why I'm pointing in that direction. But Haruko also, spoke about this in the beginning. And I think if we are now and over the years to actually reach the goal of the 2030 agenda, to go beyond and to do more, it's very much about increasing understanding, seeing the opportunities. So the education perspective that was also brought up in the beginning is incredibly important. I'm not going to react to each of the other components, but I think the narratives that you have brought is something that I will definitely take with me. I also learned a lot, but also again emphasizing that I think we as presidents of co-presidents together with Kenya of Stockholm +50, but also we sometimes as a global community meeting in negotiations rooms need to learn from. And how we create that dialogue, not just within the faith communities, but between communities also, is something that we would be very keen, I think, in trying to mobilize. Because I think I said this earlier today, but I'm moving from one room when I talk to the indigenous peoples, then I talk to the business, then I talk to the Faith for Earth dialogue. But it's not until you actually manage to have the dialogue between the groups where you also will be able to progress. So I thank you very much for this, and I hope this is really an ongoing dialogue and conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that very thoughtful reflection back to this group and for all of your work. We do have time for discussion. I have been tempted to respond to each of the speakers, but I want to keep us on track so that we can hear from others. And I'm also delighted to say that we have a surprise guest, very exciting surprise guest, who is Shantanu Mandal, co-facilitator of the Youth Faith and Environment Working Group of Unap, major groups and stakeholders for children and youth. He is assisting in that capacity in putting together Stockholm +50. So he will speak to youth engagement around these issues. And thank you so much for being with us, Shantanu.
Thank you so much, Karan, and thanks to all of you who just shared the beautiful vision that you carry for our collective future. I am very happy to be meeting many of you in person many times and have been working together with you. I would just like to share with you what we have been doing with the youth group. I am very thankful, and I thank on behalf of our complete constituency to the Swedish Secretariat, who has been always visionary and supportive in providing us the idea that let's not just bring the youth at the end. Let's start bringing youth on the every step of process. And so since December, we started putting up a team of 40 dynamic young leaders from different nooks and corners of the country, of the world. Some of them come from areas where it's very difficult for them to even speak openly anything about human rights or climate justice. But providing this youth task force gave them an opportunity to be very open and very honest about what they think about their future. It's hard to listen always when you are listening that you are our future, when we are living here in the present and breathing now in the same air that you are breathing. Imagine it's like you are recognizing the youth, yet you are saying that you are not here in the room because you are for tomorrow. And I would just bring to everybody's notice that what Einstein said was the same mindset that created the problems can never be used to create the solutions. So it is high time that we realize that youth are not the leaders for tomorrow. They are the leaders of today. It is the right time for us to recognize this and bring them into the every step of the decision making, the processes, and also the implementation. And what's wrong in doing that right now when we have recognized that this is the way ahead? And the second point that I would like to bring is that we are happily working together as a team, as a group. And unlike our seniors and our elders, we do not see much of a difference in global north and global south. We come together so easily, we come to consensus so easily, we understand each other so easily. I am white is difficult for others. So maybe that's something for all of us to think, but probably I would just leave you with these ideas to work with us more closely. Don't be afraid of youth just because we are high on energy. And also I would like you to just keep aside that thought that, youth are naive, they don't know much, it is we who would tell them. I would thank Dr. Iyad, because when he approached us, the Children and Youth Major Group, with the idea of Youth Council, which we just launched, by the way, today. So congratulations to all of us. He shared that this is a youth council that we want to put up under the Faith for Earth Coalition. But he never made us say that this is what I want. He said this is an idea, and he opened the doors for us to design it the way we wanted. So thank you, Dr. Iyad, for doing that. And I'm telling you, we would not disappoint you, because we are learned youth. We are not just youth with energy, we are also youth with expertise. And as youth from the faith-based organizations, we also have a lot of authenticity that comes very natural to us. We also do take care of each other. A simple example is when we finished the Youth Environment Assembly happening in Unia, we took the 60 delegates, national and international youth delegates that have come here, to the Karura forest on a nature walk of 1.5 hours. Why? Because what are you fighting for inside those concrete halls? You need to come out, connect, and see how living and sentient nature is. Don't just talk about nature, don't just think about nature, be a part of nature. And with that message, I would also request, maybe think big, be ambitious, take out the ministers from those boxes of rooms, sit under a tree, and I'm sure the decisions would come faster. Thank you so much, Karina, and everyone, for listening.
Thank you so very much. That was a wonderful addition to our dialogue. And I want to add my word of deep gratitude to Dr. Iyad Abou-Mogli and Faith for Earth for creating this space and for doing this vital work, which is not always easy. And there is opposition because it is so worthy and so powerful for the changes that we need. We have 15 more minutes, and we can open this space for dialogue. I would like to begin. I was noting that each of the speakers was not only giving us an overview of what is really happening in the world, but also being quite specific with the proposal for what to do. And I think that speaks to the way in which faith communities are actually deeply engaged in processing these issues. And I wanted to pick up on something that Father Josh said when he was speaking about that critical mass, gathering that critical mass, thinking about what Mandela did, what Gandhi did, what some other examples of where that spark was started and movements really changed with that leadership. And I wanted to note also, though, that that when we heard from Reverend McDonald and others, but Reverend McDonald saying, you know, we are now in a situation where people are getting they're shaped by the technologies and more in a way that they used to be shaped by religion and faith. And so my question for all of you is that spark still possible? Can we gather these communities and that critical mass in this time that we know is different in the ways Reverend McDonald described? And if so, how do we do it today? That's my question, and any of the panelists might raise their hand to speak to it. I see Gopal. I apologize if I don't see others. Gopal?
Yeah, I'll just share one reflection on this piece, and it's not my reflection, it's the reflection of the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi for the UK for many years. And, you know, he said that, you know, he wrote a paper a number of years ago where he said that in human history, when there has been a revolution in communication, there's been a revolution in faith. And he pointed to the example of the printing of the Gutenberg Bible. He said that when the Bible became available to the public at all, and not just in the hands of a few, it fundamentally changed the Christian world. And he compared that to the arrival of the internet and modern communication technologies, that with the coming of the internet, of us being connected, as Shantanu was saying, so instantly with people from all across the world, where there is no concept of North and South for many young people now, it is fundamentally shifting the contours of faith and spirituality. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here that we can lean into as religious and faith communities, which is that with this coming of changing of communication, of digital lifestyles, of the metaverse, and so many things that are coming our way, whether we want them or not, it speaks to my earlier point that we can try to resist and maintain the status quo, or see where the opportunity is to kind of move things forward. And I think there is a real opportunity here to engage with shifting technology and communication and the shifts that are taking place in religious identification and practice, to how they can all lend themselves to greater environmental awareness and care.
Thank you so much for that. Father Josh?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I might say two things. So first of all, very briefly, I think the key is to make the journey participatory, involve as many people as possible, make them leaders. But the second point, listening to our dialogue, I feel inspired to say, I think this reimagination, new beginning, will happen when we are courageous to allow a new leadership. Indigenous communities were mentioned, youth were mentioned, women. And I always think of Stockholm. I come originally from India. The great speech that Indira Gandhi made, even now is so fresh. What she said at that time. And we saw also with COVID, and where women leaders take control of the situation, they have been much more efficient. So I'm so happy that Ambassador Johannes joined us and she's with us. Let's make an explicit, choice to give leadership to these communities, indigenous, youth, women, minorities, and probably I'm sure that's promising. All that is possible, if I might add, going back to old values. That's where religions, our perennial values, Against consumerism, we propose sobriety. Against hubris and pride, we propose humility. Against each one's interest, we propose solidarity, love. So I think combining the new with the old values, I think we will be successful. Just a simple idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's interesting as I reflect on that call for old values, there have been in a very clear and bold way things put on the table here, degrowth, to consider degrowth from Dr. Khalid, from Bishop Andreas, ecocide, add ecocide as an international crime. These are bold calls in that they are unusual for the current discourse. But it does not mean that they represent something new. In fact, they may reflect older values. And as we know, there are many that say we will be saved by new technologies that are yet to be invented. When in fact we know there's no new technology that will be more powerful than what we know is that power of connection between people and the earth and the divine. And so I want to say now that I would love to open it up for discussion. I'm a little bit nervous about time. I wonder if we could just accept that we have to roll the dice and only have one question, but hope that each of the panelists can answer that, and then also say a final word. So I'm not sure how to roll the dice that way, but if someone could help me identify a questioner, that would be great.
Yes, there's a hand up from Tara Del Mil. Tara?
Hello, I don't know whether you could see me, but can I?
We can hear you.
We can hear you, Tara.
Okay, fine. So I'm Tara Demel. I'm from Sri Lanka, and I represent Mindfulness for Earth. It's an organization that commenced work recently together with Dr. Iyad and his team from Faith for Earth. I'm from the Buddhist tradition. I've been a practitioner of mindfulness meditation for many years, over a decade actually. And what we are proposing from Mindfulness for Earth is to look at mindfulness, which is a practice of mind training, which is very old, coming down from the Buddha in northeast India from like 2,500 years ago, but subsequently adopted by so many religions. And now it has been embraced by scientists around the world. And I'm sure all of you know about it. So mindfulness has the capacity to heal, to soothe, to calm, and create significant differences in human beings, in their body and mind. And this has been proven without any doubt in the laboratory setting through neuroscience, psychology, and medicine, and the science of epigenetics. So what we are proposing from Mindfulness for Earth is that we are proposing a thesis that this type of impact that mindfulness has been proven to cause in humans could be replicated, or it could be hypothesized that this has an impact on the ecosystem, on the environment, on animals, on plants, on
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to keep us so that we close on time, which is quite soon.
Yeah.
The
So
question is about the role of mindfulness.
The question is whether we could, you could please give a hearing to us and a virtual research symposium that we are proposing at Stockholm +50, where we want to test hypotheses and to present at Stockholm +50 as a virtual research symposium.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we've heard that request for a hearing for your project at Stockholm +50, and I'm sure we will take note of that. We are very short on time, and I want to give an opportunity for each of the speakers to say less than a minute of a closing word. I want to say how grateful I am to each of you for sharing in the way that you did. This has been a very moving session. I've kept notes and look forward to the unfolding of this dialogue. And again, much gratitude to Faith for Earth. And so let us begin perhaps in the opposite order, if we can figure that out, that we went in the beginning, and start with Gopal.
I just have one word, which is onwards. We've generated so much good energy and spirit here today. Let us use this, carry it forward towards Stockholm +50 and for the next 50 years beyond that. So onwards, let's go.
Thank you. Bishop Andreas Holmberg.
Well, let me say again that I've been very inspired by what you've all shared. And since I'm in Stockholm, I'd like to welcome you. If you are able to make it here in June, most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Mark McDonald.
Yes,
Bishop.
I would just, that's okay. Thank you. I would just say that if we aren't about what is most important, we probably aren't about anything at all. And so I think that we need to help focus ourselves and the universe on that which is most important and most dear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father Josh.
Thank you.
Frozen, I believe. Father Josh, I believe you're frozen, and so we'll come back to you when you unfreeze, and go to Dr. Khalid.
Thank you, Karina. It's wonderful listening to all the speakers. My bottom line would be degrowth, because as far as I'm aware, the planet hasn't grown. It never grows. We only have a limited planet. There is no planet B. We cannot go anywhere. And if we don't handle this underlying issue and give it the priority it deserves, I don't think we are going to go very far. So I would prioritize the whole idea of degrowth, which affects every single one of us and the planet and every living being in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Father Josh, if you are back, you are always welcome to speak.
Thank you.
And
diversity, like biodiversity, that each of us bring the best in our tradition, the religions, the youth, the indigenous, then our response will be really resilient. So let us act together, bringing our best to the discussion, to this journey. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. This has been a phenomenal dialogue. We are very much looking forward to the Stockholm +50 gathering, which will be in June of this year. Many thanks to all who joined us here, and many best wishes for the unfolding of this dialogue and for the great work that we will do together in this time. Thank you, Faith for Earth, for this opportunity. Blessings to all of you.
Thank you, Karen.